Chapter 1253. Third Revolution Martial Art. Fourth Rank Martial Art. As he went deeper, the corpses that Yi Chen came into contact with became more and more powerful. Each corpse had a unique Fourth Revolution martial art, or in other words, they were formed from the corpse chi and martial art intent of the Ji Zun, and each of them represented a Fourth Revolution martial art. If it weren't for the fact that these corpses could only attack once, Yi Chen might not have been able to continue. The world's martial arts are as vast as the sea, endless and endless. Although my martial arts philosophy is different from those supreme experts, the techniques I use to create martial arts are all here, and they are even better and more perfect than mine. A supreme expert is worthy of being a supreme expert. Fourth rank martial arts can be easily created. Given enough time, it would be easy for them to create 1,000 or even 10,000 fourth rank martial arts. Yi Chen was inexplicably emotional. Although he had created the supreme sword technique Doomsday Calamity, based on the power of the 5 elements of old ancestor Wu Ling, it was basically impossible for him to create a second supreme sword technique. After all, he had not even grasped a little bit of Doomsday Calamity. As for fourth rank martial arts, he could indeed create some, but it was very limited. He did not have that much martial arts experience in his mind. At most, he could create 10 fourth rank martial arts before his martial arts thoughts would dry up. Supremes also had different levels of strength. From low to high, they were ordinary supremes, mid-supremes, powerful supremes, and super supremes. Generally speaking, supremes who had just advanced to the 9th layer of life and death realm would only be ordinary supremes. After all, those who could become supremes were all geniuses with peerless innate talents. Of course, there were some exceptions. Some geniuses with powerful innate talents could even make geniuses of the past pale in comparison. These geniuses could defy common sense and become mid-supremes or even powerful supremes as soon as they advanced to the 9th layer. Supreme Holy Lands. The outer perimeter was filled with ordinary supremes. Just a little deeper, it was filled with mid-level supremes. Even deeper, it was filled with powerful supremes. The region that Yi Chen was in right now was already the graveyard of super supremes. The difference between super sovereigns and ordinary sovereigns wasn't limited to the amount of energy. More importantly, super sovereigns had a deeper understanding of the essence of power. It could be said that super sovereigns had already reached the ultimate realm of seeing mountains as mountains and water as water. They could display the same amount of power by 10 times. In fact, supreme supremes weren't the limit. Above supreme supremes were the even more powerful legendary supremes. Compared to supreme supremes, legendary supremes were the limits of human strength. Whether it was domains, supreme martial arts, willpower, or spiritual bodies, they were all at a level where they couldn't be improved anymore. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were gods in the mortal world. Unfortunately, legendary supremes did not exist in every generation. Generally, only 1 or 2 would appear every few 100,000 years. Sometimes, one might not even appear in millions or tens of millions of years. A powerful corpse charged towards Yi Chen, unleashing a killer move that contained the 8 Desolation 6 Unity Universe. 8 Desolation Supremes 8 Desolation Hand. The person who spoke wasn't Yi Chen, but a young man in a golden robe. He held a golden rod in his hand and exuded a domineering aura. If other quasi-sovereigns were here, they would definitely recognize this person as one of the 4 young quasi-sovereigns, the golden-clad emperor. This was the first time Yi Chen had encountered a corpse that used a supreme martial art. He didn't dare to be careless and unleashed his Doomsday Calamity, slashing out with his sword. Pung! Blazing sparks exploded, and a destructive aura spread out. If the 8 Desolation Hand contained a world, a universe, then Yi Chen's Doomsday Calamity was the ultimate power that could destroy a world. The 8 Desolation Hand was slashed apart, and the corpse was directly crushed into nothingness by the aftermath. What a powerful sword intent! Why have I never seen this person before? The golden-clad emperor had originally thought that Yi Chen wouldn't be able to deal with this corpse, but he hadn't expected that it wouldn't even be able to withstand a single attack from Yi Chen. Although a corpse could only unleash 1 attack, it would dissipate after that. Just as the golden-clad emperor was slightly distracted, Another corpse suddenly appeared from the white mist. This corpse wasn't any weaker than the previous one, and its right hand formed a claw that tore through the air. Yi Chen could easily tell that this claw technique was extremely powerful, and that no matter how he tried to dodge, he wouldn't be able to avoid it. The sky, the ground, and the earth were all within his attack range. Rui Universe Claw. The golden-clad emperor was startled. The Eight Desolation Supreme was a supreme sovereign from 500,000 years ago, and there were records of his ultimate moves. Although the Rui Universe Claw wasn't as powerful as the Eight Desolation Hand, it was much sharper and more cunning. Those who were slightly weaker would be instantly pierced through. Sky Covering Staff. The supreme claw technique of a supreme sovereign, and Yi Chen's strength, also roused the golden-clad emperor's heroic spirit and domineeringness. He swung out his own supreme staff technique, the Sky Covering Staff. In an instant, countless staff shadows filled the entire space, sealing off all angles of attack from the Rui Universe Claw. Crackle, crackle! A series of explosions rang out, and the Rui Universe Claw was instantly broken. Countless staff shadows surged forward, beating the corpse to death. So it's just a superficial part of the Rui Universe Claw. The golden-clad emperor heaved a sigh of relief. He had seen the records of the Rui Universe Claw, and even he wouldn't be able to block it if it was only able to unleash 1/10,000th of its power. Unless his sky-covering staff could truly cover the sky and leave no gaps, the Rui Universe Claw would have a chance to unleash its power. Excellent staff technique, Yi Chen praised. Same to you. The golden-clad emperor laughed heartily. I am Wei Tian. May I know your name? Yi Chen. Yi Chen replied. Yi Chen, you're the #1 disciple of God Paradise? You've really surprised me. I didn't expect that not only would you enter the 8th layer, but your strength would also increase by leaps and bounds. Wei Tian had heard of Yi Chen before. After all, he was once the #1 disciple of God Paradise. He originally thought that even if Yi Chen's talent was extremely high, he would still need time to grow. Becoming a quasi-sovereign would already be amazing. You're flattering me. The golden-clad emperor's strength made Yi Chen not dare to look down on him. This sky-covering staff was different from his own doomsday calamity. It contained the yin and yang profound. In terms of foundation, Yi Chen was inferior to the golden-clad emperor. After all, the golden-clad emperor had been famous for a long time, and a greenhorn like Yi Chen couldn't compare to him. 8 Desolation Supreme has 6 supreme martial skills, and we've only seen 2 of them. Why don't we go together? The golden-clad emperor didn't care whether or not he could obtain 8 Desolation Supreme's inheritance. But if he could experience all 6 supreme martial skills of 8 Desolation Supreme, it would be extremely beneficial for him. His sky-covering staff was currently at a bottleneck. Once it broke through, its strength would increase by 10-fold or 100-fold. Alright. Yi Chen also wanted to experience the other supreme martial skills of 8 Desolation Supreme. His knowledge was limited, so the golden-clad emperor might be able to explain it to him. Just like that, the two witnessed the other 4 supreme martial skills of 8 Desolation Supreme. They were 6 Combined Fist, Desolate Sky Tyrant Kick, Universe Chi Finger, and the most powerful 8 Desolation 6 Combined Palm. Worthy of being 8 Desolation Supreme, 8 Desolation 6 Combined Fist is even more tyrannical than I imagined. One palm strike is earth-shattering. The golden-clad emperor was still immersed in the atmosphere of the martial skills just now. Turning around, the golden-clad emperor looked at Yi Chen. Eh? At that moment, Yi Chen's face was filled with a sense of sacredness. His sword did not move, but the golden-robed emperor could clearly see an illusory image of Yi Chen waving his sword. His sword technique was filled with the power of the 5 elements, and it was no longer as rigid as before. It was as if the 5 elements of heaven and earth were all under the control of his sword. No wonder he grew so fast. Such comprehension is even more terrifying than the green-robe emperor. The green-robed emperor was the youngest of the purple-white, golden-azure quasi-sovereigns. Seriously speaking, most of the essence of doomsday calamity came from Wuling ancestor, and only a small part belonged to Yi Chen. This was different from the supreme martial arts created by the golden-robed emperor and the others. Its foundation was weaker. Now that Yi Chun had seen the 6 supreme martial arts of the 8 desolate supremacy, he was suddenly inspired. He began to fuse the essence of willing ancestors' martial arts with the martial arts experience he had absorbed from the Supreme Holy Land, turning it into the essence of his own sword technique. Once the sword was unleashed, the chi of the 5 elements flowed. They generated and countered each other, and the embryonic form of the world seemed to be evolving in this sword. Supreme martial art, 5 elements sword technique. After a long while, Yi Chun came back to his senses. Many thanks. Yi Chun knew that the golden-robed emperor was protecting him. Otherwise, the corpses would have rushed over and posed a threat to him. What is the name of this sword technique? The golden-robed emperor could feel the profundity of the 5 elements sword technique. The doomsday calamity from before was indeed powerful, but it seemed that it could not be used as freely as it pleased. 5 elements sword technique. Yi Chun's face was full of confidence. This was the first supreme sword technique he had created. Chapter 1254. The Supreme of Octaterra's inheritance doesn't suit us. Let's go. Golden-robed emperor had no intention of accepting the inheritance, even though they didn't necessarily meet the requirements. Yes, the Supreme of Octaterra's inheritance indeed didn't suit them. Yi Chun was already very satisfied to be able to see part of the essence of the Supreme of Octaterra's martial arts. It was more useful than hundreds of years of hard work. The closer they got to the core area of the Supreme Holy Land, the more terrifying the aura became. Even though these supreme beings had died countless years ago, the aura and will they left behind were still unimaginable. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to form extraordinary beings like corpses. From ancient times until now, very few people knew how many Supremes had been buried in supreme sacred grounds. At the very least, Yi Chun and Golden-Robed Emperor didn't know. What they had seen was merely the tip of the iceberg. Even so, in half a month, the two had witnessed the supreme martial skills of dozens of Supremes. Each of these supreme martial skills could shake the heaven and earth. If they were used by a Supremes themselves, they would be able to twist the heaven and earth and tear apart time and space. Supreme Sacred Elephant is indeed one of the strongest supreme beings in the history of the War Elephant clan. When he uses this move, it can really shake the world and collapse the galaxy. Golden-Robed Emperor was still frightened. There was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Just now, a powerful corpse had attacked him and Yi Chun. The two of them had joined forces, but they had almost been heavily injured. One could imagine how powerful this move was. The ultimacies of earth, water, fire, and wind combined with the ultimacy of power is indeed extraordinary. Yi Chun was also quite impressed. Demonic beasts didn't create very powerful martial arts in their early stages. But once they became supreme beings, their flaws would gradually be fixed. It wasn't difficult for them to create 1 or 2 supreme martial arts. At least, they wouldn't be too far off from human supreme beings. There weren't too many techniques involved in this move. It was pure power and violence. Of course, it wasn't brute force either. After all, it contained the perfect ultimacy of earth, water, fire, and wind. But compared to this move, I'm more afraid of Supreme Xian Yuan's killing move of Xian Yuan, Yi Chun said. Supremacy Xian Yuan's Xian Yuan killer style. Of course it's powerful. I was almost sucked into it. Upon hearing Yi Chun's words, the golden-robed emperor hurriedly nodded his head. A few days ago, the two of them had seen Xian Yuan's supremacy's Xian Yuan killing style. To them, this killing move was no ordinary martial art. It was simply a super black hole. What was more frightening was that once the black hole reached its limit, it would shatter into countless smaller black holes. If one's strength was slightly weaker, they would immediately be torn apart. Unknowingly, the two of them arrived in front of a huge mountain. The height of this mountain was unknown. It was like an ancient mountain, giving off an extremely strong pressure. To their surprise, there were already people in front of the giant peak. There were 3 men and 2 women. Purple-robed Emperor. The golden-robed emperor recognized the purple-robed youth at a glance. Gold-robed Emperor? What a coincidence. The purple-robed emperor turned his head and looked over. This is... The purple-robed emperor was very curious about how Yi Chun could walk with the golden-robed emperor. The golden-robed emperor introduced. This is Yi Chun. I believe you've heard of him before. However, both of us have underestimated him. His strength is already no weaker than mine. Oh, since the golden-robed emperor said so, it should be true. The purple-robed emperor's calm expression revealed a trace of surprise. He knew the golden-robed emperor's strength, but Yi Chen could actually stand shoulder to shoulder with him. How terrifying. Yi Chen, this is the purple-robed emperor. His fan dance is extremely mysterious. The golden-robed emperor introduced the purple-robed emperor to Yi Chen. Yi Chen had heard of the purple-robed emperor before. Of course, he had heard about them from the Fire Sparrow Emperor. After all, the Fire Sparrow Emperor was in love with the green-robed emperor. After chatting with the purple-robed emperor for a while, Yi Chen walked over to a woman in white. This woman was none other than Xianhou Yan Qingxian, whom he had not seen for 100 years. Senior Yan, how have you been? Yi Chen looked Yan Qingxian up and down. Compared to before, Yan Qingxian seemed even more elegant and refined. She was like a fairy from the 9 heavens, and her eyes seemed to be able to see through fate. They had an indescribable charm. Yi Chen. Yan Qingxian smiled when she saw Yi Chen. Among the younger generation of Elysium, the only one she valued was Yi Chen. After a long time, she had gradually come to see him as a peer. She smiled and said, "Don't call me senior. I'm only a few decades older than you. You're making me sound old. Just call me by my name." She knew that Yi Chen respected her, but she was actually not Yi Chen's teacher. In fact, she and Yi Chen were both juniors of the Dragon King, so it was only right for her to call the Dragon King senior. Moreover, Elysium and the outside world were two different worlds. There was no need to talk about the past. Alright then, Qingxian. Yi Chen also felt that it was inappropriate to call her senior. Life and Death Kings had a lifespan of 100,000 years. In Elysium, it was fine to call her senior. Here, age had no meaning. For example, the Gold Robe Emperor was 1,000 years older than Yi Chen. Compared to 100,000 years, the gap between him and Yan Qingxian was almost negligible. Besides the Purple Robe Emperor and Yan Qingxian, there were 2 men and 1 woman. They were an old man, a middle-aged man, and an old woman. The old man was called Old Ancestor Tsong Kong, one of the oldest demi-masters of the human race. The middle-aged man was the Godly Spear Emperor, and the old woman wore a phoenix hairpin and held a dragon-headed walking stick in her hand. She looked quite dignified, and people called her Granny Dragon and Phoenix. It was said that her body contained the blood of dragon and phoenix, and she was a half-beast. Youngsters, you are still young. Old Man Heaven's Will's inheritance should be left to me, Old Ancestor Tsong Kong. You will have plenty of chances. Old Ancestor Tsong Kong didn't dare to look down on them, especially the Purple Robe Emperor and the Gold Robe Emperor. These two undoubtedly had the strength to fight against any demi-masters. The Gold Robe Emperor smiled. Old Ancestor Tsong Kong, don't take advantage of your seniority. Moreover, the inheritance of a sovereign is for those who are fated to obtain it. Even if we give it to you, you might not be able to get it. That's true, but if you don't fight for it, wouldn't my chances be higher? Old Ancestor Tsong Kong still didn't give up. He didn't have the slightest bit of confidence that he could get the inheritance from so many people. Granny Dragon and Phoenix frowned. Old Ancestor Tsong Kong, you are underestimating Old Man Heaven's Will. He is one of the few people who can fight against legendary sovereigns. He isn't as simple as you think. It won't be too late to talk about the inheritance after we defeat this corpse. As Granny Dragon and Phoenix spoke, her eyes were fixed on a corpse that walked out of the giant peak. This corpse's eyes were grayish-white, and they seemed to have intelligence. It wasn't as simple as an ordinary corpse. 7 of you. Your strength is not bad. If you can take one move from me, you can enter the mountain, Sure said with a gentle voice. Old Man Heaven's Will, you are still alive? Granny Dragon and Phoenix turned pale with fright. Sure shook his head and smiled. People who die are dead. How can they come back to life? This is just a trace of intelligence born from the original body. It only has a part of the memories. Chapter 1255. This corpse was not Old Man Tianyi. It only had a small portion of Old Man Tianyi's memories, but this was already very terrifying. Other corpses could only instinctively use Old Man Tian Yi's martial arts. But this corpse was equivalent to an incarnation of Old Man Tian Yi to a certain extent. It could use martial arts more freely and exquisitely. One move. You're underestimating us too much. Old Ancestor Song Kong laughed. He did not believe that Yi Chen could defeat them in one move. Yi Chen, don't be careless. Old Man Tianyi's ultimate art is the Heavens Will Capturing Hand. It contains a mysterious Tao, and to a certain extent, it represents the will of the universe. Be careful. Yan Qingxian transmitted her voice to Yi Chen. Yi Chen nodded. The Heavens Will Capturing Hand, as the name suggested, was a capture from the heavens. The heavens were the universe, and humans could not defy it. However, Old Man Tianyi's martial arts seemed to be the same as Yan Qingxuan's. They both walked the mysterious Tao. Perhaps Yan Qingxian would be the most suitable to receive Old Man Tianyi's inheritance. After making up his mind, Yi Chen decided to help Yan Qingxian obtain Old Man Tianyi's inheritance. She walked over step by step. Every step was incomparably natural, as if he had always been there and had never moved. Seeing this, the seven became even more cautious. Old Man Tianyi was different from the other supremes. His every move was in accordance with the will of the heavens. Going against him was equivalent to going against the heavens. One could imagine the difficulty. This move of mine has a total of 4,999,900 variations. Whoever can endure it will be qualified to ascend the mountain. Take this. Shur stretched out his right hand and grabbed towards the seven. Without a sound, the entire sky turned dark as countless hand shadows descended towards the seven. Good timing. Purple Robe Emperor shouted. A purple fan appeared in his hand. With a wave of the fan, time and space twisted. The fan shadows danced and wrapped around the descending hand shadows. The fan danced, forming a world of its own. Any attack would be absorbed by this world. This was also the supreme martial art that Purple Robe Emperor was famous for. Divine Spear Emperor walked the tyrannical path, not retreating nor dodging. The black iron long spear in his hand spun like a wheel of wind and fire, blocking one hand shadow after another. Granny Longfeng threw out the dragon head walking stick in her hand. With a dragon roar, the dragon head walking stick transformed into a golden dragon that protected Granny Longfeng. She didn't stay idle either. She pulled out the phoenix hairpin from her bun, and from time to time, she would release a flaming phoenix claw to meet the hand shadow. Song Kong Ancestor lived up to his reputation as one of the veteran quasi-venerables. His Song Kong guardian light was as vast as the sky. Any hand shadows that came into contact with it would immediately disappear, without a trace. It was obvious that this was also a martial art that contained the world. However, compared to the purple-robed emperor's universal fan dance, this move was not as agile, but it was more than enough for defense. Compared to the previous four, Yan Qingxian wasn't that famous. However, sometimes fame and power weren't related. Yan Qingxian waved her hand, and a huge mirror appeared. The hand images in the sky were reflected by the mirror and immediately replicated into countless new hand images. These hand images flew out from the mirror and met the hand images in the sky. What a wondrous martial art! Golden-robed Emperor sized up Yan Qingxian and praised her in his heart. At the same time, he also used his sky-covering rod to block the attack of the hand images. The five elements sword art was so profound that even Yi Chen couldn't comprehend it. At most, he could only comprehend 1,000th, or even 10,000th of it. The greatest characteristic of the five elements sword art was that, just like the five elements sword art, the sword chi was endless. Unless the internal balance of the five elements sword art was broken, there was no way to counter this move. Yi Chen, who used the five elements sword art, was the most relaxed among the seven. It wasn't because he was the strongest, but because the five elements sword art was too exquisite. This kid is amazing. He can actually create such a meticulous sword art based on the five elements profound. Song Kong Ancestor frowned. The youngsters nowadays were more and more outstanding than the previous one. The older generation like them were a little on the decline. The five elements sword art has improved a lot. As a witness of the five elements sword art, Golden-robed Emperor didn't know what to say about Yi Chen. In such a short period of time, his sword art had improved steadily, and he had never stopped improving. At their level, profoundness was no longer important. They could basically learn the profoundness they were good at to perfection. But at this time, creativity was the most important. The more creativity one had, the more powerful the martial art would be. The same profoundness could be created differently by different people. Some were very ordinary, while others were unbelievably powerful. Even though Golden-Robed Emperor wasn't afraid of the 5 elements sword art right now, he was sure that Yi Chun would be able to push the 5 elements sword art to a higher level if he was given more time. The hand images were endless, and the scariest thing was that as time passed, the hand images changed more and more. From the beginning, there were tens of thousands of changes, but now there were hundreds of thousands of changes. One should know that the more changes there were, the harder it was to decipher it. Hundreds of thousands of changes meant hundreds of thousands of possibilities. If one didn't consider one possibility, it would be fatal. Heaven's will is unfathomable, and so is this move. It was the first time Yi Chun had seen such a complicated movement. It was even more complicated than the stars in the sky. The good thing was that the 5-element sword art did not stop circulating, and there were very few flaws. Otherwise, it would have been broken through for sure. Suddenly, a muffled groan was heard. It was the Divine Spear Emperor. He had missed several changes, and was caught by a huge hand image. He had no idea where he was thrown to. 7 people, only 6 were left. I don't believe that I, Ancestor Song Kong, can't hold on until the end. Ancestor Song Kong was gradually reaching his limit. A few drops of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his eyes flashed with unwillingness to admit defeat. Ancestor Song Kong let out a roar and stretched his hands to the sides. Like a rock spreading its wings, a huge circle of light appeared. Looking closely, the circle of light was formed by countless black and white runes. This was his supreme defensive martial art, Vault of Heaven Protection. Dragon and Phoenix bring prosperity. Granny Dragon and Phoenix were not much better than Ancestor Song Kong. A dragon and a phoenix surrounded her, and the two complemented each other seamlessly, bouncing away all the attacking hand images. Unfortunately, the Heaven's Will capturing hand was much stronger than they had imagined. Soon, when the Heaven's Will capturing hand had developed to more than 2 million changes, the Vault of Heaven Protection was broken, and the balance of the dragon and phoenix was broken. Ancestor Song Kong and Granny Dragon and Phoenix were like monkeys in the hands of the Buddha. They were easily caught and thrown far away. In the end, only Purple Robe Emperor, Gold Robe Emperor, Yi Chun, and Yin Qingxian were left. 3 million changes. 4 million changes. 4.5 million changes. Fan dance. Heaven and Earth Great Shift. Purple Robe Emperor was unbelievably strong. He waved his fan and created countless space-time flows, moving the hand images away one by one. This is exciting. Watch my heaven-encompassing staff. Gold Robe Emperor didn't lose out. After a loud laugh, he waved the golden staff in his hand from bottom to top. In an instant, countless staff images merged into one, forming a huge staff that connected heaven and earth. The huge staff swept in the air, and heaven and earth seemed to be cleansed. It was as if the staff had wiped the heaven and earth clean. Compared to the two before them, Yi Chun and Yin Qingxian were slightly inferior. Yin Qingxian used the 8 gates of life and death to continuously dodge, while Yi Chun's 5 elements sword art gradually couldn't hold on. Compared to Purple Robe Emperor and Gold Robe Emperor, he was still a bit weaker. His 5 elements sword art was also a bit weaker, and it wasn't as profound as Fan Dance and Heaven Encompassing Staff. However, the Heaven's Will capturing hand with endless changes gave Yi Chun a lot of inspiration. The 5 elements sword art seemed to be on the verge of collapse, but it always dissolved the attacks at the crucial moment. 4,800,000 changes. 4,900,000 changes. 4,990,000 changes. Not bad. You can actually hold on until now. Sure had his own sentience. In truth, the true Heaven's Will capturing hand had already lost its transformations. The greatest transformation was the absence of transformations. However, it was impossible for him to reach the level of Old Man Heaven's Will. 4,999,900 transformations was his limit. Towards the end, every additional transformation was a whole new realm. It seems like Old Man Heaven's inheritance is not fated with me. Yin Qingshuan's 8 gates of life and death were destroyed one after another. The speed at which they were being created couldn't keep up with the speed at which they were being destroyed. 5 elements sword art rise and fall in time. A waterfall-like sword light sprinkled out, covering Yin Qingxian in an instant. The hand images that came into contact with the sword light were greatly weakened, and their changes were also reduced. Yin Qingxian easily dodged them. Yi Chun. Yin Qingxian looked at Yi Chun. Chapter 1256. The 5 elements were the most basic elements of all things in the universe. The rise and fall of the 5 elements would cause all things in the universe to change. Not only could it affect one's fate, but it also caused all things in the universe to cycle endlessly. The original 5 elements sword art only used the 5 elemental mysteries. The 5 elements were very balanced, but it also meant that it was inflexible. As the saying goes, the Tao follows nature. The 5 elements had their ups and downs. As the ups and downs changed, the 5 elements sword art came to life. For example, the metal profound declined, while the other 4 profundities flourished. Wood profound declined, while the other 4 profundities flourished. 2 declined and 3 flourished, 3 flourished and 2 waned. Not only that, the ups and downs also had their own ups and downs. Different degrees of ups and downs would cause different changes. In short, the combination of the 5 elements had endless changes and different effects. The appearance of the 5 elements sword art's ups and downs allowed Yi Chun to step into a new realm. He seemed to be able to hear the breathing of all things in the universe and see the invisible lines of law. His 5 elements sword art could faintly resonate with all things in the universe and guide the lines of law. Shi's Heaven's will capturing hand hadn't reached the level of Old Man Heaven's will, so it was broken by the 5 elements sword art. At this time, the 5 elements sword art might not be as powerful as the golden-robed Emperor's sky-covering rod, nor as skilled as the purple-robed Emperor's universal fan dance, but in terms of subtlety, it was superior. 4,999,000 variations. 4,999,900 variations. However, Shi's Heaven's will capturing hand hadn't reached its limit. Although it had only increased by 9,900 transformations, its realm had increased by several levels. Its exquisite technique was still above the 5 elements sword art. At this moment, not to mention Yi Chun, even Purple Robe Emperor and Gold Robe Emperor could not hold on any longer. After breaking through countless hand shadows, one of them still managed to sneak in and teleport them to another place in the blink of an eye. 5 elements become 1, sword chi armor. At this time, the sword energy in Yi Chun's body was pushed to the limit. The 5 elements sword art materialized into a sword armor that landed on Yin Qingshuan's body. Once the hand shadows touched the sword armor, their power and transformations weakened. Although it wasn't as obvious as before, it still had an effect that couldn't be ignored. And after Yi Chun did all this, he was immediately grabbed by a hand shadow. Old Man Tiany's inheritance is not suitable for me. Qingxian grasped it well. Yi Chun's voice could be heard, but he had already disappeared. Thank you, Yi Chun. Yin Qingxian was very clear that if it wasn't for her help, Yi Chun would have had a high chance of passing the test. Against the Heaven's will capturing hand, no matter how powerful one's martial arts was, it would be useless. Only the level of subtlety would be enough. The 5 elements sword art was undoubtedly profound and unfathomable. Since Yi Chun could turn his sword art into a sword armor to protect her, it was clear that he had already grasped a part of the essence of the 5 elements sword art. Please ascend the mountain. Shi stopped attacking and opened up a path up the mountain. The Milky Way revolves. In front of another mountain in the supreme sacred ground, Chu Zhongtian was fighting with a corpse. This corpse's strength was far inferior to Old Man Tiany's corpse, but Chu Zhongtian was just one person. The Milky Way revolves was a supreme martial art. This supreme martial art wasn't comprehended by Chu Zhongtian himself. It was a martial art imprinted in his mind by the mysterious old man. If a sovereign were to know of this, they would definitely be able to guess that this mysterious old man was a sovereign, because only a sovereign could imprint his own supreme martial art into the mind of another. It was similar to inheritance, but different from inheritance. The longer the inheritance, the clearer the memory of the martial art would be. A supreme martial art forcefully imprinted in the mind would gradually fade with the passage of time, until that part of the memory was lost. Waving the mace, sparkling diamond stars appeared around Chu Zhongtian. These diamond stars seemed to revolve irregularly, but as they revolved, a majestic force was added to Chu Zhongtian's body. Some majestic force surged out from Chu Zhongtian's acupoints, forming a Milky Way that resonated with Chu Zhongtian's breathing. If Chu Zhongtian's thoughts changed, the Milky Way would also change. The opposite corpse couldn't be underestimated. The martial art it used was a supreme martial art that contained the profound mysteries of light and darkness. Heaven's secret transformation. The heaven's secret transformation was mysterious and unfathomable. Flashes of light flickered, its trajectory impossible to predict. If it were another quasi-sovereign, they would have long since been melted by these flashes of light. Heaven's secret transformation, the supreme martial art of sovereign primordial universe. Fortunately, Master's Milky Way revolves around this kind of unpredictable supreme martial art. Chu Zhongtian began to suspect that his master, the mysterious old man, was a sovereign. Supreme martial arts were wondrous and extraordinary. There was no absolute restraint between them. It all depended on one's comprehension and usage. If the mysterious old man wasn't a sovereign, then the Milky Way revolves around him would be limited, and wouldn't be able to easily deal with the heaven's secret transformation. Thus, Chu Zhongtian began to understand that the mysterious old man was at least a sovereign's supreme martial art, and a quasi-sovereign's supreme martial art naturally couldn't be compared. The former had already been perfected, while the latter only had a trace of its essence. If one looked closely, they would realize that the Paragon's sacred ground was like a huge chessboard. The center was filled with mist, and that was where the Paragon legend's tomb was. As for the people who came to the Paragon sacred ground, they were like chess pieces that were either actively or passively teleported to different areas. The place where Yi Chen appeared was extremely close to the legendary sovereign's tomb. His vision was shrouded by a layer of mist, which covered time and space. Even the netherworld's sacred eyes couldn't see anything clearly, because the rules here had been completely changed. Heaven and earth were reversed, yin and yang repelled each other, and the 5 elements were reversed. Not to mention Yi Chen, even ordinary sovereigns wouldn't be able to see anything if they came here. Since he was already here, he might as well take things as they came. Within the mist, time and space didn't have any meaning. A single step could allow one to travel dozens, or even hundreds of light years. Kill. Vaguely a murderous aura could be felt. Crack. The time and space around Yi Chen instantly cracked like crystals. This murderous aura could even destroy the structure of time and space. What a powerful murderous aura. A crack also appeared on Yi Chen's protective sword energy. In the 3 realms, there's nothing that can't be killed. Kill. Whoosh. The time and space around Yi Chen completely shattered. Time no longer existed, and space no longer existed. Yi Chen could even feel his life energy weakening. 3 realms, could it be the 3 realms of heaven, earth, and human? Heaven and earth represented the universe, the firmament, and the universe. Human represented life, and all sorts of possibilities. In an instant, Yi Chen knew the identity of the owner of the murderous aura. The sovereign of the 3 realms. One of the 7 sovereigns in the history of the human race. These 7 sovereigns were the sovereigns closest to the true God realm. The strength of the sovereign of the 3 realms was unimaginable. His 3 realms killing fist was said to be able to annihilate and destroy everything. However, this 3 realms killing fist had already transformed from a tangible form into a murderous aura. This murderous aura changed according to the will of the sovereign of the 3 realms. When it was weak, it could only shake one's mind. When it was strong, it could destroy the heavens and earth, creating chaos. Chapter 1257. The killing intent became more and more ferocious. Yi Chen saw stars falling and time flowing in reverse. This killing intent was no longer an ordinary killing intent. It contained the supreme profundities of the universe. Withstanding the killing intent, Yi Chen continued forward. The Paragon's tomb was something that could only be discovered by luck. Even if he couldn't obtain the inheritance of the Paragon of the Three Realms, being able to witness the true Three Realms killing fist was already good enough. This was more useful than cultivating for thousands of years. After all, the martial arts of the Paragon of the Three Realms were created with painstaking effort. Pop, pop. Space-time collapsed as masses of chaotic chi currents were born. The universe was originally evolved from chaos. The Three Realms killing fist could already destroy the universe in a small area, approaching the limits of what the universe could endure. Suddenly, a mass of chaotic chi currents rushed towards Yi Chen. Even with Yi Chen's methods, it was hard for him to evade. The chaotic chi currents had already surpassed space-time, and there was no possibility of evading. Unless Yi Chen's cultivation was comparable to the Paragon of the Three Realms. The chaotic chi currents didn't annihilate Yi Chen's body and soul. Yi Chen entered a different space. Within this space was a vast sea of stars, as well as a white-robed, white-browed middle-aged man. The Three Realms killing fist is the fusion of three supreme fist arts. In order, they are the Heaven killing fist, the Earth killing fist, and the Mortal killing fist. The Heaven killing fist is ethereal and formless. From tangible to intangible, it's all within a single thought. Take this. The middle-aged man didn't move, but his fist had already punched towards Yi Chen, as though he was using his own aura to attack. What was tangible? What was intangible? Everyone could understand the surface meaning, but not many could understand the deeper meaning. From Yi Chen's perspective, tangible meant that everything had to be done according to the rules. Intangible meant that it transcended the rules. But seriously speaking, there was no clear boundary between tangible and intangible. It all depended on one's heart. Therefore, the heaven-killing fist should be the power of the heart. The power of the heart could be strong or weak, and it was extremely strange to deal with it. Just like the middle-aged man, Yi Chen didn't move and started to counterattack. He counterattacked with his heart. What he thought in his heart would become reality here. In the outside world, Yi Chen didn't dare to do this because he couldn't do it. Boom, boom, boom. Without any signs, countless explosions occurred between the two. The invisible battle had already begun. There was no concept of time in the alternate dimension. The two of them fought for an unknown period of time, and the sound of explosions gradually slowed down. You are worth teaching. Your heart is strong enough. Pass. The middle-aged man smiled faintly. His figure flickered, and a door appeared where he had been standing. Thank you for your guidance. Yi Chen entered the gate. The scene before Xiao Chen's eyes changed. It was no longer a vast sea of stars, but a boundless chaotic land. Standing on the ground, Xiao Chen could sense the boundless power of the earth, able to bear everything. Earth realm killing fist, boundless chaos, boundless power, the pinnacle of power, the essence of the earth realm killing fist. There are no variations, it is purely based on power. The middle-aged man appeared again, and said to Yi Chen. Yi Chen fell into deep thought. According to the middle-aged man's words, Yi Chen could roughly guess that the earth realm killing fist contained the profoundness of power. Of course, power was too abstract, and anything that moved had power. Thus, one needed to have enough capacity to contain this power. Out of all the things in the world, the earth was without a doubt the object with the greatest capacity. If one's heart was like the earth, then one would be able to bear all things. Take this. The middle-aged man clenched his right fist and punched out slowly. As this punch struck out, the entire ground seemed to be moving, squeezing towards Yi Chen. There was nowhere for him to hide. Five-element sword art rise and fall. Facing this punch, Yi Chen could only use his strongest sword art to deal with it. The five-element sword art's rise and fall were used, reversing the yin and yang, and reversing the five elements. He tried his best to suppress the aura and power of the opponent's fist art. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Every time they exchanged blows, Yi Chen would take a step back. When the middle-aged man punched 10 times, Yi Chen would take 10 steps back. Too strong. The heaven realm killing fist is the power of the heart. It can be strong or weak. As long as one's heart is strong, one can pass. The Earth Realm Killing Fist is the power of heaven and earth. It is the pinnacle of power. If one wants to pass, one must break through the bottleneck. The 11th punch came. Yi Chen mustered up his sword Yuan and threw out a sword attack. Boom! The ground was torn apart, and Yi Chen was sent flying. The 12th punch. The 13th punch. The 18th punch. The Earth Realm Killing Fist. Each punch was stronger than the last. There was no limit to the power, and the Earth Realm Killing Fist had no limit. The 19th punch. When the 20th punch came, Yi Chen felt that he was at his weakest. At this time, human strength was so small and not worth mentioning. However, human strength was limited, but mental strength was infinite. 5-element sword art, 5-element cut. His feet deeply rooted in the ground, Yi Chen roared. The flying heaven sword seemed slow, but it was fast as it slashed out. This sword's killing power was extremely terrifying. The 5-colored sword chi slashed across the ground, and the ground immediately collapsed, creating a deep ravine. In the end, it collided with the boundless fist energy. Boom! As if the world was being split open, a cluster of fire burst into the sky, like the first wisp of fire from the beginning of the world. It was so bright and shocking. At the last moment, Yi Chen finally made a breakthrough, and the 5-element sword art advanced to the next level, comprehending the 5-element cut. The 5-element cut integrated the profound of the 5 elements into one sword, and it was controlled by the power of the heart. Without enough heart power, it would be impossible to use this sword. The understanding of the Heaven Realm Killing Fist was being integrated into Yi Chen's sword art. Good sword art. I hope you can continue to pass the human realm. The middle-aged man stepped aside. Through the light door, Yi Chen came to the last checkpoint, the human realm checkpoint. Just like before, the middle-aged man began to introduce the human realm killing fist. The human realm killing fist is unpredictable and extremely dangerous. Watch carefully. The middle-aged man punched out, and layers of fist energy shrouded Yi Chen. Just as Yi Chen was about to counterattack, all the fist energy suddenly merged into one, turning into a huge fist energy that directly attacked Yi Chen. At this time, Yi Chen's reaction was a beat slower, and his sword energy was not raised to the limit, so he was forced to take the attack. Puff! Spurting out a mouthful of blood, Yi Chen's entire person was sent flying out of the sky. The human realm killing fist lies in the word change. If you can't see through this word, you won't have a chance to counterattack. The middle-aged man attacked while explaining the mystery of the human realm killing fist. Change! Yi Chen frowned. In the past, he had always been proud of his fighting skills, but now, he tasted the feeling of being suppressed. Once the opponent used the human realm killing fist, he didn't even have time to react. Every time, he didn't use his strongest power. Under such circumstances, the situation would become even more disadvantageous to him. What is change? Yi Chen began to think. The human realm killing fist was unpredictable and unpredictable. Sometimes, it could even turn the impossible into the possible, and the possible into the impossible. It seemed that even the rules of heaven and earth couldn't restrict the human realm killing fist. The rules of heaven and earth. A light flashed in Yi Chen's mind. That's right, it was the rules of heaven and earth. Chapter 1258. The rules of heaven and earth bound all things. It was invisible, but it was also visible. It was invisible because its existence could not be felt, and it was visible because it could be seen everywhere. For example, the speed limit of the universe was the speed of light. If one wanted to surpass this speed, they could only teleport. However, teleportation was not purely speed. There were signs to it. If one could surpass the speed of light in an intense battle with a strong enemy, they would have the absolute upper hand. After all, once one's speed increased, all aspects affected by speed would be improved. The mortal world killing fist was unpredictable. In terms of transformation, it was no longer bound by the laws of heaven and earth. Of course, this space was originally formed by chaotic air currents, so the laws here were beneficial to the mortal world killing fist. However, who could say for sure that the real mortal world killing fist would be like this? If it was personally executed by the supreme of the three realms, the mortal world-killing fist would definitely be millions of times stronger than it was now. If the heavens will capturing hand was the pinnacle of the universe's starry sky transformation, then the mortal world-killing fist had vaguely surpassed this pinnacle, advancing towards an even higher level. Deal with the ever-changing by remaining unchanged. In terms of changes, Yi Chen's sword art could never be compared to the mortal realm-killing fist. His current achievements in the 5 elements sword art were also limited. The sword light shone brightly. Yi Chen suddenly displayed the 5 elements sword art's ups and downs. With the use of waxing and waning, the mortal realm-killing fist's power and transformations began to decline. However, Yi Chen had still underestimated the danger of the mortal realm-killing fist. A large number of sword lights suddenly broke free from Yi Chen's control and gathered into the mortal realm-killing fist's fist force, causing the mortal realm-killing fist to also have the effect of waxing and waning, which was reflected on Yi Chen. Amazing! Yi Chen sucked in a breath of cold air. The transformations of the human realm-killing fist were indeed beyond his expectations. It could actually transform the special effects of the opponent's martial arts for his own use. Wasn't this also one of the transformations? As a result, Yi Chen's 5 elements sword art immediately collapsed. As the wind from the punch blew past, Yi Chen's hair and clothes flew backward and stretched. Strangely, the wind from the punch did not seem to have any power. The middle-aged man stopped attacking. Congratulations, you've passed the test. You can enter the 3-world mountain to receive the legacy. Yi Chen asked. Senior, I didn't pass the human realm's checkpoint, why? The middle-aged man smiled and said, even an ordinary prime would not be able to pass through the mortal realm's checkpoint. You can also see that this involves the rules of the world. Since you know the crux of it, you have already passed. The 3 realms killing fist had its own advantages. Although the human realm killing fist seemed to be the most difficult to deal with, it was not necessarily the most powerful. The heaven realm killing fist focused on the strength of the heart. As long as the heart was strong, it was enough. The earth realm killing fist was more direct and did not have many changes. It was the source of power. The human realm killing fist was like the world of mortals. It had many changes and could not transcend the world of mortals. Naturally, it was difficult to deal with the human realm killing fist. The 3-boundary mountain was so majestic that it was hard to tell if it was real or fake. Without the middle-aged man leading the way, Yi Chen wouldn't even be able to find the 3-boundary mountain. After passing through the 3-boundary monument and the 3-boundary bridge, Yi Chen arrived at the path leading up the mountain. How much inheritance you can receive will depend on your own comprehension. Life was like a mountain. Everyone started from the bottom. In the supreme holy land, every mountain represented the life of a prime. The 3-boundary mountain represented the life of the prime of the 3 realms. Walking on the path, Yi Chen saw the prime of the 3 realms when he was a child, when he was young. The prime of the 3 realms was completely different from Yi Chen's. The prime of the 3 realms was originally just an ordinary businessman. At a young age, he already had a lot of wealth. But in this world, wealth was no match for absolute power. After becoming penniless, the prime of the 3 realms began to walk the path of a martial artist. Originally, at his age, the path of martial arts basically had no future. But the reality was not like that. With shocking effort and perseverance, he managed to reach the mortal realm at the age of 35, the clasping Yuan realm at the age of 50, the Sea of Souls realm at the age of 100, and the life and death realm at the age of 280. At the life and death realm, the prime of the 3 realms began to stand out, displaying incomparably frightening talent and comprehension. The mortal realm killing fist was created by the prime of the 3 realms at the age of 1000. Then he created the earth realm killing fist at the age of 2000, the heaven realm killing fist at the age of 5000, and at the age of 10,000, he raised the mortal realm killing fist to a whole new level. At the age of 20,000, he mastered the 3 realms killing fist and became a rare supreme martial art. Evil sovereign, take this. Halfway up the mountain near the peak, Yi Chen saw the most intense battle. The 2 sides of the battle were the paragons of the 3 realms and a paragon of the evil spirit race. It was obvious that the paragon of the evil spirit race was also an extremely powerful paragon. Although the fist technique he used was not as murderous as that of the paragon of the three realms, it was filled with an extreme evil aura. The evil path advocated freedom and did not distinguish between good and evil. Once it was used, the sky was filled with fist shadows against fist shadows. At this stage, even the heavenly Tao was affected and distorted. In the end, the three realms killing fist prevailed. It pierced through the layers of fist shadows and heavily injured the evil sovereign. There were a few more battles after that, and each battle was even better than the previous one. This was especially true for the battle against the devil race's paragon, the Dark Devil Lord. Both of them were the strongest experts of their respective races. To a certain extent, their strength had already reached or even surpassed the limits of the universe. The paragon of the three realms' three-realm killing fist could penetrate anything. No matter how tight the defense was, it would be useless against the three realms killing fist. The Dark Devil Lord's dark primal chaos immeasurable hands had extreme destructive power. The three realms killing fist and the dark primal chaos immeasurable hands were evenly matched. The prime of the three realms was struck by the Dark Demon Sovereign's palm, while the Dark Demon Sovereign was struck by the prime of the three realms. At the peak, the final battle between the prime of the three realms and the Dark Demon Sovereign began. At the final juncture of the battle, the Dark Demon Sovereign broke through his original realm and became an invincible existence below the true god realm, demigod. Although demigods were not true gods, they could still change the rules within their own domain and twist the heavenly Tao. Fortunately, demigods were beginning to be suppressed by the will of the universe. Although their battle prowess had increased by a lot, they were unable to unleash their true divine power. In this battle, the prime of the three realms fell. Before his death, the prime of the three realms, along with his entire body and soul, turned into a murderous aura that heavily injured the Dark Demon Sovereign. This caused the Dark Demon Sovereign to be expelled to an unknown place by the universe. The murderous aura that the prime of the three realms turned into traversed time and space and arrived at the supreme holy land. It turned into a mountain. This mountain was the three realms mountain, so there are still demigods above the supremes. I wonder if the prime of the three realms also used some special methods to enter the ranks of demigods. Demigods, as the name suggested, possessed some of the techniques of true gods. However, they were not true gods. The life experiences of the prime of the three realms slowly turned blurry in Yi Chen's mind. In the end, only the essence of the martial arts remained. Ordinary people would not be able to understand these essences. Some were just some symbols, some were lines, and some were just a few words. Those with insufficient comprehension abilities would not even be able to understand them, let alone comprehend them. Chapter 1259. Sitting cross-legged on the peak of the three-world mountain, Yi Chen did not move at all and entered the deepest level of meditation. The sovereign's inheritance was determined by the person. Some people could only obtain a part of the essence of the martial arts, while others could obtain most of it. Normally, the higher the comprehension, the higher the degree of completeness of the inheritance. Of course, there was another situation where the inheritor's martial arts were very similar to the inheritor's martial arts, or even the same. In this case, the inheritor might be able to receive the complete inheritance. The sovereign of the three worlds' martial arts were naturally different from Yi Chen's. But what Yi Chen wanted was not the complete inheritance of the sovereign of the three worlds' martial arts, but the other's understanding of martial arts. At Yi Chen's level, bitter training was no longer of much use. Sometimes a single comprehension might be equivalent to thousands of years of bitter training. Heaven realm killing fist. Earth realm killing fist. Mortal realm killing fist. In his mind, the three fist techniques of the sovereign of the three worlds martial arts kept replaying. Yi Chen had already comprehended the heaven realm killing fist, otherwise, he would not have passed the heaven realm so easily. However, Yi Chen also knew that it was far from enough. The heaven realm killing fist could be strong or weak. When it was strong, it was even stronger than the mortal realm killing fist. His comprehension was not worth mentioning at all. To comprehend the essence of the three worlds killing fist, he had to start from the heaven realm killing fist, because the heaven realm killing fist focused on cultivating the heart. If the heart was not strong enough, he would not be able to control the three worlds killing fist. The sovereign level should require enough heart strength to cross over. For no reason, such a thought flashed in Yi Chen's mind. In the past, Yi Chen thought that training the heart was training the will, and a strong heart meant a strong will. But now Yi Chen did not think so. The heart was something on a deeper level. It was illusory, even more ethereal than the soul. A strong soul and a strong will did not mean that one would have a bright future. But a strong heart would at least mean that there would be hope. Once a life had thoughts, it would actually have dreams and aspirations. If a talented person did not have a competitive heart, then his future would definitely be limited. The bigger the heart, the bigger the future. If one's heart was limitless, their future would be limitless. After figuring this out, Yi Chen's body underwent a drastic change. At this moment, Yi Chen was still the same Yi Chen, but in front of him, a door had opened up. Once he stepped through the door, he would be able to reach the highest point of his life. Time passed like water. On the three-world mountain, Yi Chen had been sitting there with his legs crossed without moving. However, if anyone had been present, they would have noticed that the area around Yi Chen was being refracted. These refractions weren't simple refractions, such as light rays, but rather the refractions of one's heart. Gradually, the refractions grew stronger and stronger, until sword techniques began to appear. Some of these sword techniques were strong, and some were weak. The weaker ones were comparable to ordinary sword techniques, while the stronger ones were comparable to paragons. The heart could change. In other words, the strength of the heart would fluctuate. When the fluctuations were low, the strength would naturally be the weakest. When the fluctuations were high, the strength would be unimaginable. The power of the heaven realm killing fist was that it could maintain the fluctuation of one's heart at a relatively high level, raising it to its peak. As for how much one could raise it, it depended on how far one could walk in the realm of one's heart. Bang! Suddenly, a corner of three-world mountain was chopped off. In the next moment, it instantly recovered, as if it was just an illusion. All things are empty. Whether it's real or fake, it's not important. What's important is whether it's what one thinks in one's heart. Slowly Yi Chen stood up. In terms of cultivation base, Yi Chen hadn't improved in the slightest. However, the current Yi Chen was countless times more dangerous than the Yi Chen of the past. Although he was standing there, he seemed to be separated by countless different spaces, separating dream and reality, real and fake. It was truly hard to distinguish what was real and what was fake. At this moment, Yi Chen had reached the highest realm of Sword Dao Heart Sword Realm. Sword Dao Realm. From the lowest sword in the hand to the sword in the heart, each step was extremely difficult. Of course, at the 8th layer of life and death realm, almost everyone had reached this realm. Even if they were strong, they would not be that strong. It would not be easy to defeat others just because one's Sword Dao realm was slightly higher. There were too many factors influencing one's strength, and Sword Dao realm was only one of them. However, Heart Sword was different. It was the highest realm of Sword Dao, a realm that even Supremes might not be able to easily grasp. Heart Sword was no longer attached to reality or illusion, true or false. To a certain extent, it had already transcended the heavenly Dao and was on par with it. What Yi Chen didn't know was that the strength of one's heart was actually the key to becoming a true god. Only the heart could transcend the heavenly Dao and not be bound by it. Of course, Yi Chen had only just entered Heart Sword realm, which was not enough to be on par with the heavenly Dao. Even the Supremes of the three realms couldn't challenge the heavenly Dao. If they could, then he would be a true god. The stronger the heart, the stronger the sword art. Taking out his flying sword, Yi Chen performed his 5-element sword art in a standard manner. Buzz buzz buzz. Sword light spread out, gradually distorting the rules of the three-world mountain. However, since the three-world mountain was formed by the Supremes of the three realms, the power of the heart was even more powerful. Thus, the 5-element sword arts could only slightly distort the rules. If it were in the outside world, The 5 elements sword arts containing the power of the heart would be frightening and could easily distort the rules. 5 elements cut. Sucking in a deep breath, Yi Chen suddenly used the 5 elements cut. A 5-colored sword light crazily slashed out. For a moment, lightning and thunder rumbled on the 3-world mountain, and space-time shattered. It was as if the primal chaos had transformed into stars. I didn't expect you to comprehend the power of the heart so quickly. You are indeed a promising talent. The middle-aged man's figure appeared and faintly nodded. After the sword attack, the sword aura on Yi Chen's body was like a deflated balloon. It immediately withered. After all, he had just entered the heart sword realm, and the power of the heart was still unstable. No wonder the heavens will capturing hand is so unpredictable. It must contain a powerful heart force. Using one's heart to replace the heart of the heavens, it is naturally omnipotent. However, compared to the 3-world killing fist, it is probably much weaker. It's just that I have never seen the real 3-world killing fist. Yi Chen knew very well that the 3-world killing fist was very dangerous. It was fine when it was not used, but once it was used it would kill. The fist energy of the fist art had already transformed into an eternal killing intent. For the heaven killing fist, Yi Chen had already learned it. He had even comprehended the highest realm of the sword Tao, the heart sword. Next, it was the earth killing fist and the human killing fist. The earth killing fist was the extreme of power. First, one had to understand the existence of power, then turn the power of heaven and earth into one's own power to attack the enemy. The first step should be to comprehend the profound of power. Only then can I get twice the result with half the effort. Generally speaking, the profound of time and the profound of space were the highest profounds. However, in front of the profound of power, the profound of time and the profound of space were not as good. The flow of time contained power, and the maintenance of space also contained power. Power could be said to be everywhere. It was the link between heaven and earth. Power was everywhere, so it was even harder to comprehend. If one could comprehend the profound of power, they might be able to comprehend the profound of time. There was a necessary connection between the two. Chapter 1260. Although the power profound was not inferior to the time profound and space profound, it was still quite easy to comprehend in the early stages. Especially after obtaining the essence of the earth realm killing fist, Yi Chen didn't need to accumulate a lot of the original foundation, and directly pushed the power profound to 70% completion. Currently, when he used the same sword arts, its might would be much higher than before. Each move and style would be the pinnacle of his own power. When the profound of strength reached 90%, the understanding of the profound of strength in Yi Chen's mind was completely exhausted. For any profound after 90%, it would be a forbidden area. This was especially true for the profound of strength. It could be said that after 90%, the profound of strength was the true essence of the profound. The others were still external. Regarding the profound of strength, one had to truly comprehend it. There were no shortcuts. If one didn't know, then they didn't know. This wasn't like the heart sword, so Yi Chen immediately stopped comprehending the profound of strength. However, the profound of strength at 90% already made Yi Chen very satisfied. What made him even more surprised was that the appearance of the profound of strength had allowed the profound of time to be born from the profound of space. Currently, the profound of time was still very low, and its progress was also very slow. However, it had already reached 20%. Although the profound of strength was better than the profound of time, in terms of difficulty, the profound of time was harder to comprehend. There were several reasons for this. First, after comprehending the profound of space, the difficulty of comprehending the profound of time would increase by 10 times. This was different from metal, wood, water, fire, earth, light and darkness, and even yin and yang. Once the profound of space and time were combined, even if it didn't create a proper profound of time and space, it would still be very abnormal, and could even produce unexpected changes. Time and space were the framework of a world. It was clearer and brighter, so it was easier to produce a terrifying chain reaction. As for metal, wood, water, fire, earth, light and darkness, and yin and yang, they needed to combine and evolve in order to burst out a power that was not inferior to that of time and space. As for the esoteric of strength, it was independent, but it wasn't. It was said to be independent because it didn't have any esoteric that could be combined with it. Therefore, in a one-on-one battle, it was the strongest. However, compared to the space-time esoteric, the five elements esoteric, and the yin-yang esoteric, it was much weaker. It wasn't independent because the esoteric of strength could be used in any aspect. It could also be combined with the space-time esoteric. For example, the three realms killing fist contained the yin-yang esoteric and the esoteric of strength. Becoming a true god wasn't easy. Even becoming a demigod was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Even if one didn't know everything, they had to be able to evolve everything they knew to the limit. When the esoteric of time reached 20%, the power of the momentary brilliance increased by thousands of times. When the sword slashed out, a dense sword net of death enveloped time and space, slicing through everything. If it was said to be similar to space-time slicing in the past, then now it was a real space-time slicing. Its power wasn't inferior to the five elements sword technique at all. It was only slightly inferior to the ultimate move of the five elements sword technique, the five elements slash. It sounded a little exaggerated. After all, the esoteric of time was only 20%, while the five elements sword technique contained 5 kinds of esoteric to perfection. However, the space-time esoteric was very clear and could naturally make up for each other's flaws, causing a terrifying chain reaction. On the other hand, the five elements sword technique seemed to contain 5 kinds of esoteric to perfection, but Yi Chen had no way to continue increasing their power in a short period of time. It could be said that the momentary brilliance had dug out the potential of the space-time esoteric, while the five elements sword technique had only dug out the surface of the five elements esoteric. The two couldn't be compared. This was also why the esoteric of time was so difficult to comprehend. However, the current momentary brilliance was no longer suitable to be called momentary brilliance. After adding the esoteric of time, the nature of the sword technique had the attribute of cutting through everything. Let's call it the cut of death. In terms of profoundness, the cut of death was not as strong as the five elements sword technique. In terms of destructive power, the cut of death was not as strong as the slash of five elements. However, the terrifying thing about the cut of death was that it was extremely difficult to dodge. It almost cut off any escape route for the enemy. In front of the cut of death, time and space were just a relatively large piece of cheese, and the enemy would be trapped in time and space no matter what, unless their realm far surpassed Yi Chen's. Now that the esoteric of power had reached 90% completion, the next step was to analyze the mortal killing fist. The mortal killing fist was about transformation. The purpose of transformation was to make the enemy at a loss for what to do. Perhaps it was similar to the cut of death, but it couldn't be forgotten that if the enemy's attainment in the space-time esoteric was higher than Yi Chen's, then the cut of death would no longer be overwhelming. At that time, transformation was especially important. The limit of transformation theory was the limit of the rules. What Yi Chen needed to do was to approach this limit. As for surpassing the limit, Yi Chen didn't think about it. That was something that only legendary supremes could do. If he could do it, why would he need to accept the inheritance of the Three Realm Supremes in Three Realm Mountain? At the peak of Three Realm Mountain, a gale suddenly blew. Poof! With the flying heaven sword in hand, Yi Chen suddenly stabbed out. In an instant, 77,000 sword holes appeared on the boulder in front of him. If he wanted to have exquisite transformation, he first had to have sufficient speed. According to the essence of the mortal killing fist, Yi Chen set 3 goals for himself. The first goal was to stab 100,000 sword holes in an instant. The second goal was to stab 300,000 sword holes in an instant. The third goal was to stab 1 million sword holes in an instant. In fact, there was also the final goal, which was to stab countless sword holes in an instant. However, that was a goal that surpassed the rules, and was not within the scope of consideration at the moment. Although Yi Chen's movement speed had reached the speed of light, and his sword speed was also at the speed of light, the frequency at which he swung his sword was too high, and the speed of his sword would be greatly reduced. Unleashing 77,000 sword attacks in an instant was not something that ordinary people could do. The essence of the mortal killing fist was to make it easier for him to unleash more punches. 80,000, 85,000, 90,000, 100,000. After an unknown period of time, Yi Chen finally completed the first goal. With a swing of his sword, 100,000 sword holes were densely arranged on the boulder. This was not the end. On the contrary, it was just the beginning. After an unknown amount of time, Yi Chen waved his sword out, but he could still only stab out 100,000 times. However, these 100,000 sword holes could form a complicated pattern. Some looked like a blooming flower, which would continuously bloom and then wither without an end. Some looked like ripples in the water, constantly spreading out. When Yi Chen began to move towards the second goal, he instantly stabbed 210,000 times. This was the result of using the sword holes to form complex patterns. Very smoothly, the second goal was also completed. Yi Chen began to carve words on the boulder. These words were all formed by sword holes. After carving many words, Yi Chen was not satisfied. In the end, Yi Chen chose to carve the word sword. The word sword appeared one after another, and above the word sword, sword chi soared into the sky. If ordinary life and death swordsmen saw these sword words, their sword Dao would definitely soar to the next level. This was because each sword word contained too many sword Dao insights. Chapter 1261. Yi Chen only stopped after carving a total of 108,000 sword characters. Three-World Mountain was filled with huge rocks, and each of them had a sword character on it. After the relatively ordinary Three-World Mountain was carved with the sword character, the aura it exuded became sharp, like peerless swords standing there. The changes were not only in quantity but also in essence. If these sword characters didn't have any essence in them, then it would be Yi Chen's failure. Among the many rocks, there was one that was very unique. It wasn't because of the uniqueness of the rocks, but because of the sword character on it. There were 108,000 sword characters on it. This sword character looked exactly the same as the other sword characters on the other rocks, but the sword chi it gave off was even denser, almost as thick as water, shaking time and space. Feeling this sword chi, it was as if countless sword techniques were surging over. It was similar to the murderous intent of the Three-World Killing Fist. Of course, the Three-World Killing Fist was a supreme martial art, and the gap between the two was so huge that it couldn't be calculated with common sense. I can start on the third target. Looking at the 108,000 sword characters, Yi Chen slowly retracted his gaze and waved his hand. All the rocks sank down. Three-World Mountain wasn't an ordinary mountain, and it could change according to Yi Chen's will. Otherwise, ordinary rocks wouldn't be able to withstand 300,000 swords from Yi Chen. The first sword would cut it into nothingness. The wind howled, but it couldn't disturb Yi Chen's heart. Puffed! The first rock rose up, and Yi Chen stabbed it with his sword. As if time had gone haywire, the number of sword holes on the rock increased rapidly. Because the speed was too fast, it looked as if they had appeared out of thin air. 580,000 swords. Carving characters allowed Yi Chen to improve rapidly, and he could stab out 580,000 swords in an instant. But this wasn't enough. Far from it. 600,000 swords. 650,000 swords. 700,000 swords. 750,000 swords. 800,000 swords. 900,000 swords. Time flowed like water quietly passing by. After reaching 900,000 thrusts in an instant, his progress slowed down to a horrifying degree. With every 1,000 thrusts, his soul power would begin to be consumed. Yi Chen didn't expect that this would consume soul power. 910,000 swords. 920,000 swords. 930,000. When he reached 930,000 swords, Yi Chen's progress became even slower. After an unknown amount of time, he would only add another 100 or 200 swords. It was extremely strenuous. Fortunately, progress was still being made. 940,000. 950,000. 960,000. I'm almost at my limit. Yi Chen looked exhausted. and couldn't help but swallow a magnificent violet soul-refining pill. In the blink of an eye, he had unleashed 960,000 swords. Yi Chen's soul force was being consumed very quickly. It was almost as if he was using an ordinary soul attack. If not for the magnificent violet soul-refining pill replenishing his soul force, he might not have been able to maintain it. Apart from that, his current progress was so slow that it made people's hair stand on end. Basically, he was increasing his soul force by a few swords. At 970,000 swords, he would be increasing his soul force by one sword at a time. Yi Chen's guess was right. At 970,000 swords, it was indeed an increase of one sword at a time. Finally, 980,000 swords. One sword, one world. One sword, one dust. In the following time, Yi Chen entered a mysterious realm. It was like when he stabbed out a sword, it was no longer a simple sword, but a sword that contained everything. And this sword that contained everything would eventually turn into a dust. Everything in the world is just a dust. With a sigh in his heart, Yi Chen's eyes became firmer. Pooh! On the giant stone, 999,900 swords suddenly appeared. These 999,900 sword holes formed a word that no one could recognize. This was the sword word that Yi Chen had created. Looking at it seriously, it looked like the change word. It looked like a sword but not a sword, like change but not change. This was a sword word that could change. It could also be said that it was a word that was displaying a sword art. Chi 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 chi. What Yi Chen didn't expect was that this strange sword word would suddenly come to life. It turned into a peerless sword art and attacked Yi Chen. Every move was so exquisite and hard to dodge. Even Yi Chen was a little caught off guard. He was attacked until he kept retreating, unable to fight back. Could this be a phenomenon caused by approaching the limit of change? Yi Chen guessed in his heart. The essence of change was that it was alive and not dead. When the sword stabbed out, it was a spiritual world. Everything in the world was in it. Thousands of changes were also in it. It was equivalent to having one's own wisdom. However, this wisdom was imposed by oneself, which gave him a certain degree of autonomy. No wonder the mortal world-killing fist was so hard to resist. It was incredible. When the change reached that level, it was really turning the rotten into the magical, turning the impossible into the possible. Ding ding dang dang. After all, it contained his own sword art. Although Yi Chen was caught off guard, he wouldn't be defeated. After a few breaths, Yi Chen had already turned the situation around. Omniscient nature, wandering. With a sharp look in his eyes, Yi Chen performed the most transformative sword attack. This sword omniscient nature was like a dream. Walala. The strange sword word returned to its original position, as if it had never moved. Putting the flying sword back into its scabbard, Yi Chen slowly let out a breath. 999,900 swords is already my limit. The next 100 swords are a forbidden zone for now. A forbidden zone that goes against the rules. I reckon that I'll have to break through in all aspects before I can truly reach the million swords realm. Omniscient nature was all-encompassing. It blurred the boundary between reality and illusion. For the current Yi Chen it was enough. The 5 elements sword art had its ups and downs. 5 elements sword arts 5 elements / 5 elements sword arts omniscient nature. Space-time sword arts death cut. Before entering the supreme holy land, Yi Chen's supreme sword art had yet to reach a higher level. But now he had 4 supreme sword arts. Each of them was no longer so immature and had its essence. These 4 sword arts each had their own characteristics. Ups and downs could weaken the enemy's attack power and attack changes. 5 elements / was an extreme sword, combining the 5 elements into one. Omniscient nature contained the world's myriad forms, and was close to the extreme of change. Death / cut through time and space like cutting through cheese, sealing off all the enemy's escape routes. Even if one could dodge in time, they wouldn't be able to because this sword even sealed time. Not bad. You have stayed on 3 World Mountain for a total of 10 3 world years. The middle-aged man appeared. 3 world years. Yi Chen was puzzled. 3 World Mountain's sense of time is blurry. 10 3 world years is equivalent to 100 years in the outside world. The middle-aged man explained. So it has been 100 years. Yi Chen sighed. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. But here, the sense of time was too blurry, to the point that he neglected the existence of time. Time and space are two of the meanings of life. When you can ignore time and space one day, you would either be dead, or you would have become a demigod. I hope it's the latter. Smiling, the middle-aged man continued. I can see the entanglement of fate in you. Your opponents are all very powerful, far stronger than before. Go in this world, there will always be a few years that are especially exciting. It's time for fate to collapse, for gods and devils to fight each other. The middle-aged man waved his hand. Yi Chen instantly vanished from Three-World Mountain. Before he left, Yi Chen knew that this middle-aged man was the paragon of the three realms. He died after becoming a demigod. Yi Chen didn't know how powerful a demigod was, but Yi Chen could imagine that even if a demigod died, he would still be alive to a certain extent. Chapter 1262. The Supreme of the Three Realms waved his hand and sent Yi Chen to the periphery of the supreme sacred ground. The exit was right next to him. At this moment, there were already many people like Yi Chen, waiting for the exit to open. The opening time of the supreme sacred ground's exit wasn't fixed. It would only open when the last inheritor left the mountain. Otherwise, they could only wait here. Yi Chen, Morong Qingqing and Su Jing had already received the inheritance. When they saw Yi Chen, their figures flashed and they flew over. How are you guys? Yi Chen asked. Morong Qingqing replied. I received Supreme Rose's inheritance. I received Supreme Dragon's inheritance. Su Jing also said. Supreme Rose was a powerful supreme from 3 million years ago, while Supreme Dragon was a super supreme from 50 million years ago. The former's light and dark rose palm could allow one to ignore the existence of time and age indefinitely. The latter was the pride of the dragon race, and his dragon wings wisdom palm and dragon wings taishu were famous all over the world. Whose inheritance did you receive? Morong Qingqing guessed that Yi Chen must have received the inheritance of a sword venerable. Supreme of the Three Realms. Supreme of the Three Realms? Su Jing frowned. Supreme of the Three Realms wasn't a sword venerable, but he was stronger than most sword venerables. He was one of the 7 legendary supremes of the human race. If Yi Chen could fully understand the Supreme of the Three Realms' killing fist, and turn it into his own sword technique, he would at least become a legendary supremes. Haha, Yi Chen, you're out too. It seems that you've received the inheritance. The Golden Robe Emperor laughed and flew over. Yi Chen still had a good impression of the Golden Robe Emperor. You must have gained quite a lot too, right? Just as so. You should have heard of the Golden Supremes, right? Yi Chen thought for a while and shook his head. The Golden Robe Emperor smiled bitterly and was about to explain. Su Jing interrupted. The leakless Golden Supremes. He was a supreme from 1 billion years ago. That's right. The Golden Robed Emperor smiled. Although the Golden Sovereign wasn't a legend sovereign had once said that under the same conditions, he wasn't a match for the Golden Sovereign. The Golden Sphere could be said to be the most frightening defensive method. It was flawless and flawless. Right, what about you? The Golden Robed Emperor looked at Yi Chen. As for Su Jing and Morong Qingqing, they were completely ignored by the Golden Robed Emperor. He treated them as Yi Chen's confidants. The paragon of the Three Realms. Hiss! The Golden Robed Emperor sucked in a breath of cold air. You freak! You even found the tomb of a legendary paragon. And it was one of the 7 legendary paragons of the human race. Gold Supremes were very famous. They were equivalent to ordinary legendary supremes. However, compared to the supremes of the Three Realms, they were more than a level lower. Even under the same conditions, the Three Realms' killing fist could pierce through the golden circle. The former's attack was simply unblockable. Now that you mention it, my hands are getting a little itchy. Why don't we have a spar? There's still some time before the exit of the Supreme Holy Land opens. The Golden-Robed Emperor suggested. He really wanted to know how much of the Three Realms Supreme's inheritance Yi Chen had obtained. Of course, the most important thing was to test out his own gains. All right. The Golden-Robed Emperor's suggestion tempted Yi Chen. Look, the golden-robed emperor is about to fight someone. Who is it? He can actually fight against the golden-robed emperor? He is one of the 4 young paragons. He looks even younger than the golden-robed emperor. I guess the latter wants to give him some pointers. The two flew into the sky, facing each other from a distance. Everyone in the vicinity immediately cast their gazes over. The eyesight of an 8th-level life and death realm heavenly emperor was extremely sharp. However, most of them didn't recognize Yi Chen. Of course, some of them had heard of Yi Chen's name, but they didn't associate this blue-robed youngster with Yi Chen. In their opinion, Yi Chen's progress shouldn't be this fast. To be able to fight against the golden-robed emperor, even with the latter's guidance, he should at least have the strength of a peak emperor warrior. Yi Chen, be careful. My heaven-covering staff arts have improved a lot. Your 5 elements sword arts might not be able to block it, the golden-robed emperor warned. Yi Chen casually said, "Bring it on." That might not be the case. Alright, take this. The golden-robed emperor didn't hold back. The moment the golden staff appeared, a majestic aura soared into the sky like a beacon. In the next moment, the golden-robed emperor leaped high into the sky and brandished his staff. Countless staff shadows blotted out the sky, replacing the heaven and earth. It was as if he wanted to change the world and rebuild it. It's indeed several times stronger than before. Before, the golden-robed emperor's heaven-covering staff arts weren't this powerful. Now the heaven-covering staff arts had fewer flaws. But my 5 elements sword arts aren't what they used to be. Pulling out the flying heaven sword, Yi Chen brandished his sword and used the 5 elements sword arts. The 5 elements sword arts were quite powerful in terms of defense. After obtaining the essence of the 3 realms paragon's martial arts, Yi Chen's 5 elements sword arts foundation had risen to a whole new level. The 5 elements rotated, and there were no flaws. When it was used, it turned into a white ball of light that enveloped Yi Chen. Bang, 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 bang. Endless explosions rang out. The heaven-covering staff arts attacks were natural, and ordinary defenses were useless. Unfortunately, the 5 elements sword arts couldn't be underestimated either. The two were locked in a stalemate. Alright, heaven-covering staff arts. The golden-robed emperor was decisive in dealing with such a defensive sword art. In an instant, the countless staff shadows merged into one, forming a giant staff that swept toward Yi Chen. 5 elements slash. Naturally, Yi Chen didn't dare to use ordinary 5 elements sword arts to defend against the heaven-covering staff arts. The white ball of light disappeared, and a 5-colored sword aura shot out to meet the giant staff. Boom! The two of them retreated rapidly, and the shockwaves came one after another, causing those who were close to them to be thrown off their feet. The golden-robed emperor's eyes turned solemn. He didn't expect that Yi Chen would improve so quickly after receiving the inheritance. Back then, Yi Chen was still a bit weaker than him. Yi Chen, in the past 80 years, I've not only improved the heaven-covering staff arts to a new level, but I've also integrated the essence of the gold paragon's martial arts to create the golden staff arts. Compared to the heaven-covering staff arts, my golden staff arts aren't as good as the gold paragons in terms of fire control. But it's more lethal, faster, and more ferocious. Although the sparring between the two of them wouldn't be life-threatening, the golden-robed emperor didn't want to hurt Yi Chen. So before he used the golden staff arts, he told Yi Chen the characteristics of the golden staff arts. This golden-robed emperor sure is straightforward. Yi Chen nodded and said, "Next, I'll use the space-time sword art, Death Slash." Death Slash. The golden-robed emperor was stunned, and then he smiled and said, "Alright, I've underestimated you." Roar. Suddenly, a dazzling golden light burst from the golden-robed emperor's body, and the golden light gave off a wild feeling that disrespected heaven and earth. At that moment, the golden-robed emperor seemed to have changed into a different person, and his eyes were filled with aggression. Buzz! Hong Zhong's loud voice sounded, and the golden-robed emperor flew toward Yi Chen like lightning. The next moment, the golden light fanned out toward Yi Chen, and the shadows of the staff were everywhere. I wonder how he's going to block it. The purple-robed emperor, the white-robed emperor, and the green-robed emperor were all watching the battle. Chapter 1263. What a ferocious staff technique. Yi Chen's eyes narrowed. Supreme martial arts all had their own specialties. Although the 5-element slash was powerful, it was too monotonous and couldn't block the golden staff technique at all. On the other hand, the death cut was a concentrated attack that sealed space and time. The golden staff technique can permeate space and time. It's not that easy to block. The golden-clad emperor was very confident in the golden staff technique. In terms of smoothness, the golden staff technique couldn't compare to the heaven-covering staff technique. But in terms of penetration and lethality, the heaven-covering staff technique couldn't compare. All of a sudden, clang, 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 sparks exploded between the two, as if there were countless Yi Chen fighting against countless golden-clad emperors. What? He blocked it? The golden-clad emperor was shocked. Golden-clad emperor, didn't I say that my death cut is a space-time sword technique? As long as you're within the space-time range of my sword technique, you won't be able to escape. Yi Chen smiled. Indeed. The golden-clad emperor nodded. At this point, he had to admit that Yi Chen was already on the same level as him. Of course, he didn't know that Yi Chen had already comprehended the heart sword realm. If he could use it, Yi Chen's strength would skyrocket. In addition, Yi Chen also had a boundless nature. Supreme martial arts didn't focus on how powerful they were. No matter how powerful they were, if they couldn't hit the enemy, then it would be useless. Supreme martial arts focused on absoluteness, or absolute power, or absolute undodgeability, or absolute defense. Although boundless nature couldn't be considered absolute, it could be considered absolute in the quasi-zone realm. It was even more terrifying than the powerful 5-element slash, and even more unfathomable than the death cut. Golden-clad emperor, do you still want to fight? Yi Chen could tell that the golden-clad emperor wasn't going to fight anymore. He had probably used up all his tricks. As for his other tricks, he probably hadn't mastered them yet. After all, he had to absorb the inheritance he had obtained. It was already praiseworthy that he was able to create the golden staff technique. I don't want to fight anymore. You're really a monster. Among the humans, you can almost be called the #1 sword emperor. In the human race, the sword emperor and the saber emperor were more controversial. Up until now, the title of sword emperor had not appeared. It was not an exaggeration to say that Yi Chen was the sword emperor. Sword emperor? Yi Chen smiled but didn't say anything. Yi Chen is amazing. He's actually able to fight to a draw with the golden-robed emperor. The golden-robed emperor is one of the 4 young quasi-sovereigns of the human race, and he's one of the top ones on the list. Everyone heard the golden-robed emperor call out Yi Chen's name, and they knew that he was the genius leader of the paradise of gods. Almost everyone in the top 30 of the quasi-sovereign ranking is an invincible quasi-sovereign. This Yi Chen just came out of the paradise of gods. TSK. He can be considered the #1 genius of this epoch. An epoch was 10 million years. It's not just this epoch. There wasn't such a monstrous genius in the last epoch either. However, it's still unknown whether or not he can continue to be this monstrous. After all, if he doesn't become a supreme being, everything else will be meaningless. Right, since he doesn't have the Sword Emperor title yet, why don't we give it to Yi Chen? Someone suggested. Ordinary titles could be chosen by oneself, but a prestigious title like Sword Emperor had to be acknowledged by everyone. Who here wasn't an influential figure among 8th-layer life and death heavenly kings? Many of them were even quasi-sovereigns. With their acknowledgement, Yi Chen's Sword Emperor title would be confirmed. As for whether or not he could keep the title, it had nothing to do with them. I think it's feasible. The human race hasn't had a Sword Emperor for a long time. He might be able to keep it. Many people agreed. Haha, I'm Ruizi. You must be Yi Chen, right? Your reputation is well-deserved. We'll give you a title, but I wonder if you dare to accept it. An aged quasi-sovereign walked out. He was very happy to see the rise of the younger generation. With the great war between humans and demonic beasts at hand, having a bit more power would be beneficial to everyone. However, the prerequisite was whether or not Yi Chen had the courage. What title? Yi Chen glanced over. Sword Emperor. Ruizi unblinkingly stared at Yi Chen. Yi Chen wasn't too surprised. Everyone's conversation just now wasn't concealed, so he said, I'm indebted to everyone for looking up to me. If I say no, it would make me look like a fake Taishu. Sword Emperor title, Yi Chen will take it. Good. Indeed, heroes come from youngsters. Ru Easy laughed heartily. Sword Emperor Yi Chen is truly enviable. Some people are innately dazzling, and no matter how low-key they are, they can't do it. But there are still some sword emperors in the human race. Apart from them, there are also a few sword emperors in the foreign races. I reckon that they will also want to kill Yi Chen. Sword Emperor is naturally unique. Therefore, he must be unique among sword emperors as well. Hearing everyone's discussion, the golden-robed emperor smiled and said to Yi Chen, Now, your sword emperor title is set in stone. Actually, he meant to say that Yi Chen was the #1 sword emperor. It would be too unreasonable for such a genius to not have a title of his own. However, you also have to be careful. There are 4 sword emperors on the quasi-venerables list. They are the 48th Boundless Sword Emperor, the 27th Chijua Sword Emperor, the 13th Night Sword Emperor, and the 4th Evil Sword Emperor. The former is not much of a threat, but the Chijua Sword Emperor cannot be underestimated. As for the Yeksha race's Night Sword Emperor, and the Evil Spirit race's Evil Sword Emperor, they are your true enemies. Now the quasi-venerables list was basically monopolized by youngsters. Among the 4 Sword Emperors, only the Boundless Sword Emperor was older. The other 3 were all youngsters. I'll be careful. Yi Chen nodded. He naturally wouldn't be careless, especially after the Supreme Holy Land opened. It had to be known that not only did the human race have a Supreme Holy Land, but the demons also had a land of divinity and demons. The Evil Spirit race had a land of evil spirits. The Barbarian race had a wild holy land, and the Giant race had a giant spirit graveyard. In terms of perception, he was not afraid of anyone. However, others had cultivated for much longer than him. Moreover, at his current realm, sometimes a momentary difference was not the true difference. In short, the further one went, perception, opportunity, and time were all indispensable. Sword Emperor? What a joke. How many years has a boy cultivated? Yet he dares to call himself Sword Emperor. Right at this moment, a cold and slightly aged voice sounded out. Everyone looked over. It's the White-Bone Sword Emperor. Someone recognized the person's identity. The White-Bone Sword Emperor was one of the previous generation's Sword Emperors. Because he had not appeared for many years, he had always been in seclusion, so his name was not on the quasi-venerables list. However, no one dared to underestimate him, because 30,000 years ago, he was also ranked high on the quasi-venerables list. Although he was a human, he had always been harsh. Perhaps it was related to the cultivation technique he cultivated. He cultivated the yin-yang white-bone sword art, and his true essence was sinister and crafty. Chapter 1264. Yi Chen, the first one to challenge you has appeared. This White-Bone Sword Emperor hasn't appeared for 30,000 years. I'm not sure how strong he is right now. 30,000 years ago, his White-Bone Time sword art was one of the fastest quasi-sovereigns. Now that 30,000 years have passed, he should be even stronger. Be careful. Golden-Robed Emperor didn't want to stick up for Yi Chen. After all, Yi Chen's current status was no lower than his. Forcefully sticking up for him would only be superfluous. If Yi Chen wanted to keep the title of Sword Emperor, he could only rely on himself. I know what I'm doing. Yi Chen nodded and looked at the White-Bone Sword Emperor. The title of Sword Emperor is due to everyone's praise. But since Senior White-Bone Sword Emperor cares so much, I can give it to you. Give it to me? The White-Bone Sword Emperor was a little surprised and mocked. I thought you had some guts, but you're only SOSO. But since you're so tactful, I won't make things difficult for you. The White-Bone Sword Emperor had been in seclusion for 30,000 years, and he thought that his progress was godly. This time he came out for 2 reasons. Firstly, he wanted to find his own inheritance in the Supreme Holy Land. And secondly, he wanted to tell everyone that he, the White-Bone Sword Emperor, had come out of seclusion. As for the position of Sword Emperor, he was determined to obtain it. What made him even more confident was that during this trip to the Supreme Holy Land, He had finally obtained a supreme inheritance. Although the deceased supreme was only an ordinary supreme, to a quasi-supreme like him who had lived for many years, it was undoubtedly like adding wings to a tiger. Yi Chen smiled. I said I'll give it to you, but you need to be strong enough to take it. Otherwise it'll be too much of a joke. Hee. This Yi Chen is really relaxed, as if he doesn't put the white bone sword emperor in his eyes. Youngsters are more insolent. But that's right, if they don't, they wouldn't be youngsters. Yes, being arrogant is the right thing to do. I wonder how the white bone sword emperor will respond. Hearing Yi Chen's words, the surrounding people couldn't help but laugh. Junior, you're too arrogant. The white bone sword emperor's face darkened. His eyes flickered and suddenly, a black and white sword light shot out. This was the ice sword art that contained a soul attack. Pop! Unfortunately, the moment the black and white sword light appeared, it was annihilated by the golden light emitted from between Yi Chen's eyebrows. When it came to soul attacks, Yi Chen wasn't afraid of anyone below the supreme being level. White bone sword emperor, please advise me. Yi Chen didn't waste any more words. He knew that he had to defeat the white bone sword emperor today. Very well. Let me have a taste of your skills. Based on the strength of Yi Chen and the golden-clothed emperor, the white bone sword emperor had a 70% chance of defeating Yi Chen. It had to be known that they were both peak existences among quasi-sovereigns, so a 70% chance of victory was not a small amount. Buzz! The white bone sword emperor did not directly attack, and only closed his eyes. When he opened them again, a powerful domain spread out, and because this domain was so powerful, it even started to become corporeal. The outer walls of the domain and the spatial barrier were filled with white bones that had countless sword runes on them. A sharp and terrifying aura spread out, permeating through space and time. The 8th level of sword domain, white bone sword domain. What? The white bone sword emperor's sword domain has broken through to the 8th level. This time, Yi Chen is in trouble. Although the sword domain is only a part of one's strength, if the difference between the two sword domains is too great, their strength will also be greatly affected. One side's strength will be amplified by the sword domain, while the other side's strength will be weakened by the sword domain. This battle is going to be very difficult. Everyone was shocked and couldn't help but look at Yi Chen. When Yi Chen fought with the golden-clothed emperor, the sword domain only protected him and didn't spread out. Therefore, they didn't know what level Yi Chen's sword domain had reached. However, to be honest, they didn't think that Yi Chen's sword domain had also reached the 8th level. Under normal circumstances, the younger generation's sword domain would be slightly lower than the older generation. Only those who had cultivated for a long time could compete with the older generation. For example, the purple-clothed emperor's sword domain had reached the 8th level, while Yi Chen had only cultivated for a few hundred years. I didn't expect this white bone sword emperor to really amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. The golden-clothed emperor frowned. He admitted that he had underestimated the white bone sword emperor. If he was the one fighting with the white bone sword emperor, the final result wouldn't be good. Of course, he still had a trump card that he hadn't used yet, and that was the golden orb of the golden sovereign. Once he used the golden orb, he would be able to protect himself. Su Jing and Morong Qingcheng, who were very familiar with Yi Chen, didn't have any changes in their expressions. This was because when the white bone sword emperor revealed the 8th level of the sword domain, Yi Chen smiled. The others didn't notice it, but the two of them did. Do we still need to fight? The white bone sword emperor said confidently. An ordinary sovereign's sword domain was only at the 8th level. Of course, the majority of sovereign sword domains were at the late stage of the 8th level, or even the peak stage of the 8th level. That might not be the case. Yi Chen's expression was indifferent. His blue clothes fluttered without any wind. Suddenly, an even more terrifying sword domain spread out. This sword domain was also at the 8th level. What was different from the past was that numerous azure lotuses bloomed in the sword domain, and within the lotuses were numerous peerless swords. The vast and boundless sword chi caused even space to ripple. What? It's also the 8th level of the sword domain? Everyone was shocked. How old was Yi Chen? His sword domain had actually reached the 8th level. What was even more inconceivable was that Yi Chen's sword domain seemed to be even more terrifying than the White Bone Sword Emperor's sword domain. The sword Dao contained within it was even purer. Its sword yuan. Using sword yuan to propel the sword domain is much more terrifying than using true yuan. At this moment, those who didn't think that Yi Chen could keep the title of Sword Emperor were shaken. With the 8th level of the sword domain propelled by sword yuan, it wasn't impossible for Yi Chen to keep the title of Sword Emperor. Damn it! This kid has actually broken through to the 8th level as well. The White Bone Sword Emperor was secretly annoyed. He had no idea that Yi Chen's sword domain was originally only at the 6th level. Even after some improvements, it was only at the peak of the 6th level. However, after reaching the supreme realm of the Way of the Sword, the Heart Sword, Yi Chen's sword domain grew stronger every single day. In the end, it reached the early 8th level in one go. If he had enough time, it would be possible for him to reach the peak of the 8th level. The Heart Sword was the supreme realm of the Way of the Sword. It represented that Yi Chen had already touched upon the final mysteries of the Way of the Sword. Yi Chen used the 7th level of the sword domain in his battle against the Gold-Clothed Emperor. After all, he didn't want to defeat the Gold-Clothed Emperor so easily in front of everyone. Moreover, the Gold-Clothed Emperor would definitely be holding back. Crackle! Their sword domains came into contact with each other, and countless sounds of destruction rang out. The White Bone Sword domain was extremely impressive in terms of defense, while Yi Chen's Green Lotus Sword domain was offensive. As soon as the two collided, it was like lightning striking the ground, erupting with an unprecedented shockwave. Chapter 1265. Crack! Crack! Just as everyone had expected, Yi Chen's Green Lotus Sword realm was powered by Sword Yuan after all, which was much more stable and sharp than the White Bone Sword Emperor's White Bone Sword realm. After a while, the White Bone Sword realm started to crack, and the Green Lotus Sword realm started to seep in. Oomph! The White Bone Sword Emperor snorted, and put away his White Bone Sword realm, only using it to protect himself. This way, the range would be smaller, but the defense would be much stronger. Yi Chen's Green Lotus Sword realm wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Of course, there was a downside, which was that Yi Chen's Green Lotus Sword realm had a wide range, which was enough to affect his condition. However, Yi Chen didn't rely on this. He also put away his Green Lotus Sword realm to protect himself. White Bone Sword Emperor, your White Bone Time sword art is said to be one of the fastest sword arts among quasi-sovereigns. My Death Cleave contains the profound of time and space, which is also very fast. How about we compete? Although Yi Chen wouldn't look down on the White Bone Sword Emperor, he wouldn't think too highly of it either. With the Heart Sword realm, the White Bone Sword Emperor wouldn't be able to threaten him unless he was several times more powerful than the Golden-Robed Emperor. As far as he was concerned, the White Bone Sword Emperor was a pretty good sparring partner. He had been training his sword arts on the Three Worlds Mountain, but if he wanted to perfect his sword arts, sparring with powerful opponents was also indispensable. Back then, the Three Worlds Killing Fist was able to shake the world, and it had a lot to do with his experience in battles. Take this. Without giving the opponent a chance to speak, Yi Chen flicked his wrist and performed the Death Cleave. In an instant, a dense net of swords spread out, covering the White Bone Sword Emperor. The Death Cleave contained perfect space profound and 20% time profound. In terms of trajectory, it was almost perfect. However, in terms of timing, it wasn't perfect. Yi Chen wanted to see how the White Bone Sword Emperor would break this sword. The Golden-Robed Emperor couldn't be considered to have broken this sword. It could only be said that the Golden Staff arts were too overbearing. Small tricks. Although he said so, the White Bone Sword Emperor didn't slow down. His sword was a white bone sword with a milky white body, and a longer tip than normal swords. Shoo! 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 Xiao! In an instant, it was as if countless White Bone Sword Emperors had appeared. Every White Bone Sword Emperor had a different posture, but what was similar was that as he swung his sword again and again, the fine sword net was annihilated in an extremely orderly manner. Indeed, as long as the opponent also has space and time profound, my death cut will have many flaws. This white bone sword emperor easily found the flaws of my death cut, and broke them one by one from weak to strong. Yi Chen was not in a hurry, and continued to use death slash. After a short while, the white bone sword monarch started to feel a bit impatient. His opponent was only using this move over and over again, as if he was just a sparring partner. He also discovered that there were fewer loopholes in death cleave, and it was no longer that easy to break through. Have a taste of my white bone light evasion slash. The white bone sword emperor drew a complete circle with its white bone sword. In the next moment, space-time distorted into a shocking arc. The sword net that Yi Chen had sent out was actually refracted towards Yi Chen himself. Space and time profound is vast and profound. I am not as good as the white bone sword emperor. From this sword attack, Yi Chen could tell that the white bone sword emperor's space-time sword art was indeed one level higher than his, and the opponent had not even used his white bone time sword art yet. Clang! Clang! Using death slash to deal with death slash, Yi Chen dealt with it very easily. Two intersecting sword lights suddenly flashed and swept past Yi Chen's neck, tearing a hole in the green lotus sword domain. These two sword lights were a part of the death slash that Yi Chen had sent out before. However, the white bone sword emperor had used some unknown method to twist the space-time and change their trajectory and time sequence, which was why Yi Chen had almost been hit. The older the wiser. In terms of space-time sword art, Yi Chen is not as good as the white bone sword emperor. I wonder how Yi Chen will deal with the white bone time sword art. While the crowd was discussing, the white bone sword emperor finally exploded. He turned into a beam of white light and shot towards Yi Chen. The space flickered incessantly, and each flash would make people want to vomit blood. Because it contained the charm of space-time disorder, it was impossible to lock onto his exact location. Lose. Beams of white light shot out. These were the sword lights from the white bone time sword art. Each sword light actually contained the power of space and time. Ordinary methods would not be able to block them. If one could block the power of space, they would not be able to block the power of time. The overlapping of space-time was enough to carry out a space-time dimensional attack. Powerful. This was the first time that Yi Chen had seen such a terrifying space-time sword art. Compared to it, Death Cleave was indeed much more immature. However, Yi Chen still had the 5-element sword art. In terms of defense, the 5-element sword art was rather terrifying. Almost instantly, Yi Chen was enveloped by the white light sphere that was glowing with a 5-colored halo. The white light sphere formed a world of its own and similarly contained space-time. It wouldn't be easy for the white bone time sword art to invade it. The sound of bubbles bursting rang out. Countless sword lights penetrated into the white light sphere. However, as the sword lights penetrated deeper, their speed became slower and slower. In the end, they became stagnant and could no longer move. The power is weakening. The white bone sword emperor squinted his eyes. How could he not see that Yi Chen's 5-element sword art was not only very impressive in terms of defense, but it could also weaken the power and transformations of his sword art. 5-element sword art, rise and fall. Sometimes, rise and fall wasn't very useful against enemies that were too strong. This was because he had his own limits. However, if it was used against someone who was similar to him, it would be extremely terrifying. It could weaken the enemy's attack power and transformations. It could be said to be a divine technique. This Yi Chen hid quite a bit of his strength when fighting against me. The gold-robed emperor smiled bitterly. If Yi Chen had used the 8th level of sword domain earlier, he could only take a beating. The white bone sword emperor's expression was very gloomy. He had originally thought that he had a 70% chance of defeating Yi Chen. However, who knew that Yi Chen not only had the 8th level of sword domain, but also had such a powerful defensive sword art. Although his white bone time sword art was impossible to dodge, what could the white bone sword emperor do unless he could break through Yi Chen's defense? Forget it. I've obtained the sovereign's inheritance. In the future, I'll have the chance to perfect my sword art. I might even create a new sword art. There's no meaning in hiding it. It'll only make people look down on me. Having made up his mind, the white bone sword emperor's aura suddenly soared. Sword burial art. This sword contained the profound of space-time. It was different from the white bone time sword art. This sword buried time. Of course, it buried the opponent's time. There's actually such a sword art. Yi Chen's blood and qi were boiling. He discovered that no matter what he did, he couldn't use the 5 elements sword art. His time seemed to be locked by the opponent's sword art. The older generation really can't be underestimated. These old fellows always hide their strength. If it wasn't related to face, the white bone sword emperor probably wouldn't use this sword art. The purple-robed emperor sighed. The white-robed emperor nodded. Indeed, he was a man of few words. The white bone sword emperor could already see the result of the sword burial art. Unfortunately, white bone sword emperor, you are indeed very powerful. However, this is still not enough. Suddenly, the space-time around Yi Chen fluctuated. The white bone sword emperor's sword burial art was bounced off. It was as if there was an invisible Yi Chen using the 5 elements sword art. Chapter 1266. Heart Sword. The stronger the heart was, the more powerful the sword art would be. The sword burial art could seal Yi Chen's body, but it couldn't seal Yi Chen's heart. Impossible. Less than 10 people under the supremacy realm can block my sword burial art. His space-time profundity isn't as high as mine, so how could he block it? The white bone sword emperor couldn't believe his eyes. The sword burial art was created based on the essence of supremacy flower burial, and his own understanding of space-time profundity. It could seal the opponent's time in an instant. Of course, his time profundity was only at 20%, so it wasn't absolute. However, Yi Chen's time profundity didn't surpass his. How could he know that Yi Chen had already entered the Heart Sword realm? Under the Heart Sword realm, one might be sealed. But after reaching the Heart Sword realm, the power of the heart would be unimaginable. Whatever the heart thought, everything would become the truth. The white bone sword emperor's sword burial spell could not lock onto Yi Chen's heart at all. So how could it seal his heart sword? What a terrifying sword burial art. If I hadn't comprehended the Heart Sword realm, I would have suffered a great loss. With the white bone sword emperor as an example, Yi Chen warned himself that he could not underestimate some of the older generation warriors. These people might not be as famous as the young martial geniuses on the list, but they had lived for countless years, and more or less had some trump cards. As long as they were given the right opportunity, they would be able to create an extremely powerful martial art after accumulating a lot of experience. Of course, the older generation couldn't be underestimated. Yi Chen wouldn't look down on those on the quasi-venerables ranking. The golden-robed emperor was ranked 24th. This trip to the sovereign Holy Land might have raised his ranking, but it was also possible that his ranking would fall instead. Who knew how much the others had improved? Especially those in the top 10. They had probably already reached the pinnacle of the quasi-venerables realm. My sword art might seem powerful, but it's still immature, especially when compared to the white bone sword emperor. However, I still haven't used omniscient nature. This is the essence of the 5 elements sword art. Yi Chen wasn't too sure how strong omniscient nature was. He could only find out by testing it on his opponent. Sword burial art. The white bone sword emperor did not believe it, and once again used the sword burial art to attack Yi Chen. In his eyes, Yi Chen had a treasure that did not fear time, which was why he did not fear his sword burial art. However, the potential of a treasure was limited, and it could not be used endlessly. There would always be a time when its power was used up. As long as his opponent did not have a treasure, there was nothing to worry about. Twice, 3 times, 5 times, 9 times. Yi Chen didn't counterattack. He was very interested in the sword burial technique. After blocking the sword burial technique time and time again, he was able to slowly understand the true face of the sword burial technique. As long as he could obtain a trace of its essence, even if it wasn't all of it, it would be extremely useful to Yi Chen. He could use this trace of essence to combine it with the martial arts essence of the 3 realms paragon, and his own understanding of the space-time ultimacy, to create a sword technique similar to the sword burial technique. The 13th time. This time, the white bone sword emperor went all out and used the sword burial art at full force. Even the onlookers could see that the space around Yi Chen had started to freeze, and Yi Chen himself seemed to be wrapped in a transparent crystal, completely sealed. In front of him, an incomparably sharp sword light pierced towards him. Clang! However, it was all in vain. Yi Chen did not even move, and the incomparably sharp sword light was directly deflected and turned into nothingness. White Robe Emperor, do you know what kind of technique this is? The Purple Robe Emperor frowned slightly and turned his head to ask the White Robe Emperor. The White Robe Emperor was silent for a moment, then slowly said, "If I guess correctly, it should be the Heart Sword Realm. However, I have never heard of anyone below the Paragon level being able to reach the Heart Sword Realm." Yes, the one who spoke was the Cyan Robe Emperor. The Yasha race's Yi Jianhuang and the Evil Spirit race's Evil Sword Emperor have both reached the Heart Sword Realm, the Cyan Robe Emperor continued. Oh! The Purple Robe Emperor's face flashed with surprise. He still trusted the Cyan Robe Emperor's words. The latter never lied, and he would not say something he was not sure of. As for the Yi Jianhuang and the Evil Sword Emperor, the Purple Robe Emperor had seen their detailed information. As geniuses of different races, the possibility of them meeting each other was very small. Once they did, it might mean that one side would die. The Yi Jianhuang and the Evil Sword Emperor were naturally not called Yi Jianhuang and the Evil Sword Emperor. They were called Sword Emperors in their respective races. But the human race did not recognize them, so they added a word to each of them. Just like how other races would not recognize Yi Chen's title as Sword Emperor, they might add a word to him, making him the Human Sword Emperor. From the information, the Yi Jianhuang and the Evil Sword Emperor were naturally very terrifying. One was ranked 13th on the quasi-venerable list, while the other was ranked 4th. Their reputations were definitely not undeserved. According to the information, the Yi Jianhuang's heavenless great sword art had already reached an extremely terrifying realm. It must be because of the Heart Sword Realm that he had such power. As for the Evil Sword Emperor's Evil Sword of Misfortune, only its name was known. No one had ever seen this sword art before. White-robed Emperor, it's been 1,000 years since I've seen you fight. I wonder what level your strength has reached. The war between humans and demons is both terrifying and exciting. That is the most glorious and cruel time. The Purple Robe Emperor clenched his fists tightly. Now is the time for everyone to accumulate power. Whoever improved would be the one laughing at the end, overlooking the starry sky. There were a few more spectators. They were Dugaju Chu Zhongtian, Dantai Mingyue, and the others. Yan Qingxian had also come. Without exception, their gazes were all focused on Yi Chen. Everyone's gaze was complicated. Yan Qingshuan's gaze was a little strange. She seemed to be looking at Yi Chen, but at the same time, she didn't seem to be looking at him. But in the end, she was still looking at him. He's always so dazzling. Isn't he afraid of being burned by his own radiance? Chu Zhongtian sighed. This didn't sound like something he would say. Some people are born to be worshipped. What we can do is perhaps follow behind him and witness his legend. Dantai Mingyue said softly. After the sword burial art failed 13 times in a row, the White Bone Sword Emperor finally gave up. You should have comprehended the Heart Sword Realm. But how much of its power can you unleash? The White Bone Sword Emperor could already confirm that Yi Chen had reached the Heart Sword Realm. Unfortunately, the Heart Sword Realm was the hardest to control. To use it to greatly increase the power of one's sword was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Yi Jianhuang was an exception. As for the Evil Sword Emperor's Evil Sword of Misfortune, no one knew what was going on. There's no need for the Heart Sword Realm. I have a sword. Please give me some pointers. After obtaining the essence of the three realms' sovereign's martial arts, Yi Chen could naturally use the Heart Sword Realm to increase the power of his sword. But the White Bone Sword Emperor wasn't worth it. Boundless nature was enough. He relaxed his body and raised his right arm. The Flying Heaven sword was in a straight line with his eyebrows. There was no sound. Yi Chen's sword and hand disappeared, turning into illusory bubbles. In an instant, the entire world became quiet. Time and space seemed to be replaced by a world full of bubbles. In these bubbles, the White Bone Sword Emperor saw his own thoughts, saw himself dodging and resisting. Chi 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 chi. The White Bone Sword Emperor's body spurted out blood. The blood was so beautiful, intertwining with the bubbles. When the transformation reached the limit, the opponent's inner changes would be absorbed. This sword required a certain amount of soul force. Of course, it also contained a trace of the heart sword realm. After all, Yi Chen had already reached this realm. Even if he didn't use it intentionally, it would still leave a trace. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.